My name is Lizzie Karen, and this episode is all about language. It overlaps with the episodes about Tehut, because after the deluge, he was instrumental in facilitating the development of written language amongst other humans, who, because of their lack of technology and their generally violent approach to life, were called the equivalent of primitives. But to fully address language, I need to first of all take you back to before the days of Tehut, to what we call Atlantis today. And that's 37,000 years ago. We as a people, the Tehutals, already had excellent spoken language skills, gestures were common, and writing was normal for everyone. A parchment and a type of ink paint was also used, and books were opened at both sides. They were folded like a concertina in the middle. We wrote top to bottom, left to right. Sometimes if I see a symbol that looks like a character of writing from one of my regressions, I feel like it looks familiar, but the whole alphabet and the structure of the language is very foggy. I don't actually know how the people of Tehut got to this level of language, but from that point I can tell you what I know. We did have, however, a story about how before our language became written, we would memorize important things using song. And later we saw some of the primitive civilizations, pre-deluge, doing the same thing. By using song, it was somehow easier to remember things that were taught, and this was used when memorization was required. We had other stories about earlier civilizations, but no evidence. But when Uran began traveling to search for a better location for our people, he encountered many other civilizations, but only one was sufficiently advanced to have written language and complex books. And this is the civilization of Tehut's origins. There was much that was mystical and unknown about Tehut's civilization, but we do know that they were educated and had books, as I said. Once we moved to our new city of Tehut, our focus was on knowledge and education. Language, in my earlier regressions, I remember a written language. I remember the books. The language, it was simple, in that a symbol represented a sound, and combined sounds made words and sentences. But something happened when my people got more and more technology. Symbols started to be used more than the alphabet. And I know this sounds a bit back to front, that you'd start with like a symbol for a tree and stuff, and then it would become an alphabet. But it seemed to be that the symbols became more like, well, it reminded me a lot of emojis. The symbols and characters of the old alphabet were used in combination with colors for different meanings, and the full character language was only really ever used at an academic level. So essentially, written language evolved with the technology to be something completely different, and a full written language was only necessary for the academics. Normal life required only spoken language and symbols, actions, gestures to operate the technology. I do not remember in any of my dreams actually writing anything. A bit weird, like with a pen, you know? But I do remember operating the devices on my wrist or on the crystal iPad-looking items. For some interactions, I remember touching the devices, while on other occasions I remember using hand movements or gestures to communicate to the devices. Here's a funny kind of thing that happened to me in my current life. My partner bought me an iWatch for my birthday last year, and one morning, while I was half awake, half asleep, I caught myself doing a strange hand gesture to my watch. In my slightly sleepy state, I was only trying to find out what the weather was going to be like for the day. Anyway, I could talk for hours on how it felt using the flower watch devices or the crystal iPad thingies, but the point I'm trying to make is that written language became something in Tantal that is really difficult to describe. It really did just look like a heap of mathematical star symbols, lines and colours. And of course, this is how the use of words and language gestures combined to contribute to the concept of magic. My people would use words or gestures to control devices. To anyone outside the culture, they would be unable to comprehend this. Hence, to them, it would be magic. So, magic obviously requires words, incantations, and gestures, like the swirl of a hand. It is particularly obvious to me when I see a magic show as just a performance of something that really was once a form of communication. It is easy to understand how this happened even, because it's still happening today. The technology then, admittedly, was quite different in very many ways to what we have today, but there are enough similarities that it can make the understanding of what happened much easier. I will put it into today's terminologies. Imagine that all your communications with your cell phone or your computer were through Siri or Alexa or Google Assist. You tend to have regular things you would say like, "Hey Siri, call home," or "Okay Google, play the latest news," or "Alexa, turn on the hallway light."
Support for that with Siri.
Okay, that was Siri talking back to me because she heard me all the way over here. Anyway, this is a type of language communication we have today with our technology. Maybe next we'll be saying to our fridge something like, "Open sesame." Arthur C. Clarke once said, "Any significantly advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." So, anyway, that's a quick overview of the language of Tantal and the other associated locations, because they all basically communicated the same way. The destruction of so much of the world during the time of the deluge left the Tantal people without a homeland. But once we had recovered ourselves and our technology sufficiently, we started to focus on getting our world back in balance, since so many plants and animals, as well as humans, needed help re-establishing. But that is another story, but it's linked to what I'm about to talk about, because we aided the human groups as best we could to find them and keep them alive, but we focused on the planet as a whole initially. Then later, we focused on the humans that survived to help them achieve more than just survival. Now, in terms of the primitives, survival was pretty much all they had for the first 1,000 years after the deluge. So having helped with food production, it was decided that the greatest gift we could give the primitives was to help them develop into civilized people. And this was the gift of written language. As an aside, we tended to only assist and provide food, etc., if they ceased killing animals while we were with them, and preferably permanently, but hey, you know. And many of them did that. We were aware that they usually did continue to do that when we weren't there, though. The other Tantal group, led by Japay, who I've spoken about in previous episodes, would visit the same groups, and they too would help, or at least pretend to help. But their main focus was on trying to get the primitives to worship their leader, Japay. It was a bit of a mixed-up time. They would tell the primitives to even sacrifice animals, and even people, to Japay in exchange for favours, which Japay rarely, if ever, gave. He was good at giving rules, however, and he was pretty good at smiting, big time. Hence, some of the human groups we were unable to help, as they had already been corrupted and would not accept our help. But for many, we either helped them before Japan started to interfere, or they managed to be somehow overlooked by Japan. So back to the teams facilitating the development of written language. Written language, we believed, helped cultures to grow so they could start trading with others and generally become more civilized. I will outline the reasons why it was so important. First, memorization was then no longer required, and knowledge could span generations without the need to memorize. 2, it was easier to build on existing knowledge and less likely that that knowledge would get corrupted. 3, language and numbers go hand in hand, and numbers, which we taught at the same time, are crucial for advancement. Tehut and my grandmother were the ones to get this underway. Together, they devised a program to help set up written language around the world. There were key pockets of people that were helped. Based in Kem, they trained younger philosophers to help these primitive groups form their own written language. They found it was not possible to teach the primitives our language, as it had evolved into a rather complex and nuanced language. So they based the language for each group on what little language the primitives already had. I recall the names of some of the people involved who trained to do this, but I don't remember if they went out as a group or split into separate teams. I wasn't directly involved. I only helped out a little, and I don't have much by way of regressional memories on this. But his core team, if my memory serves me right, was Ina of Anas, Unta of Anas, Chair or Kair of Tantal, Chi, maybe it was she of Tantal. Now this name possibly is my grandmother, but I don't absolutely remember my grandmother's name because, well, we just called her grandmother, so it's not a name that's fixed in my mind. Anyway, there was also Huya of Anas, Lil of Anas, Hua of Tantal, Selva of Tantal, of Tantal, and Ki of Tantal. Now, I think these people were the leaders, and there were lots of others who helped as well, but they're the only ones that I noted their name down. Anyway, while based in Kem, Tehut would split his time between the active teams while also being the leader of both Kem and Tehut the place. 4 of the team leaders, you may have noticed, came from a place called Anas, and the rest from Tantal or Tantal City. This is interesting because I don't know where Anas is, and I have no regressions regarding this place or the origins of these particular people. Most languages were based on the way the primitives already communicated, but once they had a written language, their development rapidly improved. Kem was the most unusual of locations because it had a well-established Tantal base of several cities, well, mostly destroyed, but nearby there was also a large primitive population that had found the area to be particularly abundant. In Kem, sometimes we felt like we were the ones being watched, rather than us being the watchers. In Kem, as with the other locations, we helped them to create a language together using the words they already used and developing further any syntax for them and creating a written version of their language. Because it was essentially their language, it was very easy for them to remember, to adopt what we taught them, and to adapt what we had taught them and develop it further. Often a picture would represent a word, and numbers were taught alongside words. The language teams tended to go through the following process. Firstly, they would watch the primitive group and establish that that group had achieved sufficient language skills to receive written language. Next, the team would learn their language, work out the structure of their existing language. Third, once fluency was achieved by the Tantal group, they would approach as visiting neighbours bearing gifts and elect to live amongst the primitives. This was the most dangerous aspect of the work. Primitives were often erratic and, in general, couldn't be trusted. But in order to help them develop written language, it was necessary to understand them fully. Once trust was established, the Tantals would start to teach and facilitate the development of a language that worked for those people. Like, what is this called? A tree. Okay. Draw it. Great. Now draw it again. Wonderful. Now pass your drawing to the person next to you. So good. Now copy their drawing. Now swap over again to the next person and draw that version of the tree. Now we'll complete and then repeating it quickly until they all had a simple version of a tree, and essentially all the participants were drawing the same simple stylized tree. This technique worked well because they created their own version of each word, and it being reinforced over and over, the group didn't forget the words that they had created together. They were also taught how to make writing tools, inks and paper. One group that had already got a well-established system of creating pottery, however, preferred to put the more important documents onto clay tablets that would harden or even get fired. Another group used metal sheets to record things of importance. The groups essentially created their own written language with the help of Tehut's teams, and they were taught how to teach it to their children and to other human groups. Once this was achieved, written language was able to evolve on its own in each area. For example, phonetic alphabets evolved on their own completely independently, and this would not have been possible within the time frame without the seed of written language being planted. As written language spread, some languages melded together, while others developed new streams of that language, or a dialect, and evolved separately into another language. Some of the locations where this was done are the Mesopotamian area, Indus Valley area, Central America, probably Mexico, South America, probably Peru or Bolivia. Doggerland, I'm pretty sure it was Doggerland because it was near to the University of Thebes. And I think there was China and obviously Egypt. I'm sure there were others, but I just can't think of them. Many of the people who worked on this project ended up staying longer with a particular primitive group in order to help them further. It was quite common for us to get fond of the people that we were helping and stick around to try and help them further. But as you may have guessed, Japay's people continued to try to interfere. Over time, they tended to focus on one particular area, the Mediterranean and the Mesopotamian areas. And the ongoing struggle against Japay was extremely frustrating, but that is actually another story for another day. So, all up, that's how Tehut and the people of Tantal helped the primitive people of the world after the deluge to get back on their feet and start being more civilized. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and maybe even click on the bell icon so you can be kept informed when a new episode comes out. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye.